Hey there, my fellow designers and creatives. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to another video in this series on redesigning a mobile app. In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the groups feature of Fold Money. There are a lot of things that we actually have to fix in this feature. So without any further ado, let's get started. All right. So what you see here is a screen recording of the entire groups feature. And I felt it's important to show you this through a video recording rather than screenshots and flows because it's a lot easier to understand. There's a lot of interaction problems here as well. Right. So now the first thing that is you can see here is that the groups is actually the third tab in the transactions tab, right? So you've got all, you've got test group, and then you've got groups, right? Now the biggest problem here is that from a hierarchy standpoint, it doesn't make sense to have groups as a tab at the same level where you have test groups and all, right? So groups is some sort of a different, area itself, and under that you need to have test group. Now you have the test group over here, which is basically pinned, right? It's actually pinned, as you can see over here, which is why, you have this as a separate tab. But then it feels very weird that when I tap on test group, I get pretty much the same screen over here as the same screen that I would see if I tap on more over here, right? So it feels a little weird that you have two touch points to land on the same screen and which are very close to each other, right? So from a hierarchy standpoint, putting groups as the same tab under test group feels like a very weird experience, right? Now I'm going to look at this groups things first, and then we're going to come into the test group and look into that. Now the first thing here, things look visually very weird. You have different corner radiuses. Here you have the create a test group is in the center. The rest of the elements are left aligned. And even the corner radius is different, as I just mentioned. When you tap on create a new group, you get the screen which looks a little, very 2000-ish design. All right. And as you can see over here, the cross sort of doesn't come along with this, banner. It sort of just fades in, which is again a very weird experience. I think this screen can definitely look better. This sort of feels like a wireframe right now. So that's one. The second thing here is when I tap on the test group, we land on this screen. Now, this is the same screen as what we see over here. It's just that we can't add transactions or search transactions, right? So what is the point of having this screen if we can't add or search for transactions? And at the same time, I can't even view these transactions. So if you see over here on the top, it says 2,994 from 6 transactions and 10,977 from 1 transaction. If I want to filter and just look at those transactions, let's say I want to look at those 6 transactions, there is absolutely no way for me to do that. I'm actually tapping on the screen and there's no way for me to do that. There's no filter. There's absolutely nothing. And even when I go to more, I can't actually filter for those 6 transactions. I don't know. Now, in this case, it's all right because there are only 7 transactions, but you might have a case where you have added 20 plus transactions or even up to 50 transactions, and finding just those, 20 transactions which are negative is a big pain because there's no way to filter for that. All right. And over here, even the scrolling, should ideally make the entire screen scroll up and make it a full screen. But again, that's an interaction problem. That's number one. This is the only place in the entire app where you have this dual layout, which, doesn't really look great, to be very honest. And it feels very inconsistent from the other app. The next thing here is that the entire concept of filtering months is, time period is super weird, right? Because if you swipe left, you have checkboxes for 2022 and 2023, which is fine. But then when you come over here to month, you have all months, which is weird, right? And if you choose March, what does that mean? Are you choosing March of 2022 and March of 2023? I don't know. That feels like super weird. When I tap on this, it says no transaction found because I'm searching for March 2022 and 2023. All right, let's try something else, right? If I go to all months and I tap on apply, and let's say I choose something in May, for example, right? So if I choose May and press on this, I get to see this. But does this mean if I turn off 2023, this is super weird, right? So pay attention to the UI over here. So when I tap on 2023, 2022 becomes disabled with a checkbox, but 2023 is active. And when I tap on 2022, the 2023 becomes disabled with a checkbox. This is like a super weird, unintuitive experience, to be very honest, right? And we're going to look at this in a separate video about, the time period picker. All right. But when I tap on, let's say May, and I just want to choose 2022, which is again super weird. Let's see. Okay, it doesn't, right? So you're allowing me, and okay, and here it resets the entire thing, right? So I had selected May, but for some reason it defaulted to all months. So let me turn this back on and I do this. So it's super weird. And here again, I can't really tap on any of these items, which is basically the 6 transaction, 1 transaction, and you can look at all of those details, right? On the top right, we have the settings, which looks fine. This could have been a simple bottom sheet. None of this is actually adding any value whatsoever. This, you can pin up to 5 groups below the search bar in the transactions tab. I mean, this is very weird when you're explaining sort of like design decisions, where you're saying you can pin up to 5 groups below the search bar in the transactions tab. This is not necessary for a user. You don't see apps talking and communicating like this. When you say pin groups, users should understand what happens when you pin. If you're explaining to users that you can pin up to 5 groups below the search bar in the transactions tab, that means you haven't designed an efficient experience, right? But anyway, I'm going to close this. All right. And you can tap on each transaction to view the transaction details, which is fine. Now, when I tap on search transactions, we get this screen, which is fine. And let's say I choose Netflix, for example. All right. It does something that's pretty cool. Now, let's say I want to add a few transactions, right? So let me go ahead and close this up. And now for some reason, I don't see anything. It just says add transactions. What happened to all my transactions, right? Right. This is a super weird experience. Where did all my transactions go? Right? I have to go back, click on more again, and then I see it, right? So this entire interaction in UX design is completely broken and we really have to fix it. Now, when I tap on plus to add something, now the thing that bothers me a lot here is that disabling elements is probably a very poor experience, right? So here the tag which says earning is disabled. Now it says choose transactions, which is fine. And if I tap on any of the elements, nothing really happens, all right? And if I long press on it, we get the context menu. So how the hell do you actually select a transaction? Because as you can see, I'm actually tapping everywhere. The weird thing here is that you have to swipe. And when you swipe, you get this interaction, which is not really the best experience, to be very honest, all right? First of all, it's super hidden and not a lot of people are going to know how to tag the transaction. The second thing here is, well, let's say I select these 2 transactions, all right? On the top right, there's a check mark. And it's very unclear what that does because the title says choose transactions. If the title said add transactions, it makes more sense rather than choose transactions because there's no CTA with very clear instructions as to what happens when I tap on the check mark, right? The other thing here is that now that I'm looking at a list of all transactions, there is no ability to filter as well because I will want to filter certain set of transactions and add them, right? It's not just search. I have to filter transactions if I really want, and then I have to add them, right? Because maybe I'm looking for a specific date, which was in, the beginning of the year. So are you going to expect me to scroll all the way to, January 2023 or February 2023? No, it doesn't really make sense, right? Just searching is not going to be enough, right? Because I might want to add transactions that belong to a certain period or a certain few weeks, and I want to have complete flexibility when I'm adding a transaction. But to do that, it's not really effective over here. Now, there is a way to do it, but that defeats the whole purpose of having the search feature there, right? I can go to all transactions. I can go to filter. Let's say I choose only outgoing transactions. Let's say I choose for this month. Let's say I got 55 transactions. And here I can actually add to group, but I have to do it manually. And if I swipe, I can select it. All right. And then I can go ahead and add it to an existing group, right? So if you're giving me the ability to do all of that here, why can't I do that over here in this place, over here, right? So we see there's a lot of very much disconnect and a poor user experience, and users actually have to think a lot and try so much without knowing whether they will get it right in the first try or not, right? This is actually a very complicated experience, and this really has to be simplified to the simplest levels, right? And another thing over here, when we search for transactions, right? So let's say we add a filter, right? So let's say I add outgoing, or let's say I do incoming for this, or maybe let's say this, we do this quarter, right? And we say 67 transaction. The entire tab changes over here to filter transactions and clear, and you have this search bar that's active, and it feels like the whole screen is sort of, changing way too much, and it's quite unclear, right? And the word clear doesn't look like a button you can tap on. It just looks like a piece of text. And obviously we're going to look at the search experience in a lot more detail, but this looks completely weird, to be very honest. All right. So anyway, coming back to groups, and we tap on this, this is basically what we have. All right. And now we're going to go into Figma, and we're going to go ahead and see how to fix all of this. All right, so here I'm in Figma. I've just put out the screenshots. Let's do a super quick recap, and then we're going to look at the designs. So we start off over here in the transactions tab, and we have this groups tab. And when you tap on create a new tab, we get this screen. I'm not going to be redesigning the screen because it's a very super standard pattern. You just do a little bit of benchmarking. You can get the answer yourself. There are already a simple set of patterns, and this isn't following any design language as a part of the design system. So yeah. The next thing here is this. When you tap on this, which is actually the group, you get this screen. This is pretty much the main screen, and this is what we're going to be redesigning. All right. And then when you tap on the settings over here, you get this screen. This ideally just becomes a bottom sheet with 4 options and maybe a title and a description. So there's nothing great to redesign over there as well. There's nothing great to show there as well. So I'm not going to be redesigning that. For this, I'm going to be making a separate video. This happens when this screen comes when you tap on this particular tab. First of all, you have 2 entry points for the same screen, which is probably the most weirdest thing I've ever seen. This requires a dedicated video because I'm going to look at all the settings and filters across the entire app and make a dedicated video on it because it needs a ridiculous amount of fixing. And then when you tap on add transaction, you go ahead and get this screen where you get a list of transactions, and then you tap on this, you swipe, and then you can select multiple transactions, and then you can add it. Now the search experience is going to be a separate video, so I'm not going to talk about that in this video. You can find it in a separate video when I talk about the entire search experience. All right, perfect. So now let's go ahead and look at the screens one by one. So we're going to start off with this screen, and this is where this is how groups currently is. If you're seen the transactions video, this is the final screen of how the transaction screen would actually end up looking like. And I added this icon button, which is basically the groups, which should be the entry point to the entire groups feature altogether. It makes no sense to have it as a separate tab over here because of reasons I already explained. So I added another touch point over here to take you to a new screen, right? So if I come back over here and highlight this, this is what happens when you tap on this. You get to the group screen, which is pretty much similar to this thing that we see over here. All right, and it's a lot simpler and consistent. I'm just using this one list item component and I've constructed it in such a way that I can get pretty much all other types of elements that I want, which follow the list item pattern. All right. Now you can create a new group from here. You can select which of the groups that you want to get into more details. You've got a section for archived as well, which is over here, right? We can go ahead and have this as another list item, or, we could have it as an accordion, not really important right now. You might not have a lot of archived groups, but this is something that's super important. This shows that this icon, this group is pinned, and it shows you the net value as well, right? So 7 transactions, 32 transaction net value, right? I don't really like it when, we use too many words and phrases. We're saying 7 transactions totaling to this much, right? Is this positive or negative? And if it is negative, would it actually be negative? I don't really know, but let's assume that it's correct. All right. Now, the next thing is when you tap on one of the groups. So let's say you tap on Europe trip. This is the screen that you get. Of course, in my case, I call it a test group, but here I've called it a Euro trip. Doesn't really matter. This is the screen that you get. Now, the first thing that I did was I tried to come up with a screen that looks like this. All right. And the reason I came up with a screen that looks like this is because we already finalized on this screen, which is basically the category screen. When you go to a particular category, let's say in this case, investments, you have this date, or the month basically, and then you have the chart, which basically shows how much of the entire expenses is investments in, right? And then you can also swipe to view the various specific months, and then you've got the list of transactions, and you can sort them and filter them or do whatever you want right here, right? You can even change that. So I use the same pattern, all right, and I designed this screen over here. It's important to make sure that there is really good consistency from a visual standpoint between your screens. If you have too many screens that look very different, then it's not really a good user experience, because there's no other screen in the entire app that has this double modal sort of a thing, as like a base layer over here, and you've got this modal on top. There's no screen like that in the entire app, right? And from a visual standpoint, I can point out a bunch of things. This color is different from this color, from this color, from this color, and here the corner radius also is different. So coming to a visual standpoint, there are plenty of inconsistencies, right? I'm not even going to look at those things, right? We're going to look at the core user experience. Now, one of the problems that I mentioned is that I want to be able to quickly look at what are these 6 transactions, because I'm looking for specific transactions, or I'm doing some analysis, right? I need to know what these 6 transactions are, right? And when you have a lot of transactions, it's important that you filter for outgoing and incoming transactions, right? Or in this case, expenses and incomes, right? So this pattern didn't really work because, there's no way for me to find incomes and expenses, right? And I didn't want to have another tab anywhere over here because it doesn't make sense to have net expenses and incomes as tabs, right? So I came up with a brand new concept, all right, which looks very similar to this, all right? The same swiping mechanisms, but we start off with the net amount. And when you swipe, you get to see your total incomes, all right, which is, let's say in this case, 10,977. And because we are using a very nice pie chart, the same pattern that you're using across the entire app, I can just highlight this and say, this is how much it actually is. And when I swipe again, we can see expenses. Now we can debate on and come to a decision whether we should have net incomes and expenses or net expenses and income. It totally depends on a use case level, right? But this solution is also scalable, because let's say you have only incomes, or let's say you have only expenses. You will then have only one card over here with the total value, and we'll have something called as net. So this whole thing will be green in color in case there are only incomes. And as we swipe, the transactions below also are going to reflect what is on top. So if I land on the total income section, I get to see all the income transactions. If I go on if I swipe to the expenses section, I get to see all the expenses transactions. So this bottom section automatically changes depending on this. Now, the best part here is that when I tap on this, basically this is the filter, and I can filter for a bunch of things, right? It is a global setting, so it affects the net transactions, it affects the income transactions, and it affects the total expenses, right? But here, there is no possibility to do any sort of filtering whatsoever, right? And I find that to be a very weird thing, right? You should be able to filter and search for specific set of transactions as much as you want, all right? So that's one thing. You can also add transactions from here, which is fine, or also search for specific transactions if you're looking for something specific. Of course, search is going to be a totally different video. I'm going to talk about that very separately. But over here, this is where we would have search. All right. Now, another thing here is that here I had date, category, and merchant. And maybe it makes sense to have date, category, and merchant in this case also, right? So there are two things. We can search for a specific time period, and as well we can search for date, category, and merchant. But in this case, because my assumption here, and of course we would have to validate this with users or look at data, that date, category, and merchant are not things users would often look at when they come here and look at a group, right? And of course, this is business. We could even call this Europe trip, for example, or whatever, right? Just focus on the actual solution rather than the copy over here, all right? And because I'm assuming that, these things are not commonly used, we would probably put it in a filter where we could filter for this, and we could filter for the date or basically the time period as well, right? So all of this feels, very global in nature. And of course, you have this button to view the settings where you can pin, delete, archive, rename, whatever you want to do, right? So this is what I came up with as a replacement to this particular screen. And of course, it looks super clean, very simple and straightforward. And there are a bunch of colors, a lot of corner radius issues. Here, the corner radius is smaller than this. The things look very messy over here, all right? Then the last thing here is adding transactions. So let's say I tap on this button to add a transaction. I can come over here, and this is the screen that I have. Now, of course, as I mentioned in the early part of the video, it's important to filter because you might want to select a few set of transactions, and you can't even filter by date over here, right? So maybe this would probably be a calendar icon, or, if we have to go ahead and add in more details and more options, then we would probably have the setting to choose income or expenses, or, filter out for specific tags. A lot of those things could be important, right? Because right here, there is absolutely no filtering mechanism, right? I have to search for something or scroll forever, right? So if I want to choose a specific transaction, you're forcing me to search, and I might want to search for multiple types of transactions and select and add all of them at the same time, right? But I can't really do anything over here. I can only search, or I have to scroll and search for it. So this is not really an effective process. So the next thing I did over here was I added the search, of course, which was as usual. Here I would say search transactions. All right. And here the copy says add transactions, or maybe here in this case, I can choose select transactions. All right. Or choose transactions, whatever is the same. And here you have to swipe. All right. So if I come over here, you had to swipe to select it. But of course, here in this case, just tapping the item or even the tag would turn this into some sort of a check mark, right? This is a very creative way to use this part, because this icon is not really adding that much value, and you're not going to make any decision based on the icon. You're going to look at the date, the time, the category, the subcategory, and all of those things. So this icon isn't really adding value, right? As long as the information that you have is visible over here, this icon is no more relevant. So you can tap on it and that becomes a check icon. And down below, we bring out this button that says add to transaction, which is like super clear, right? But over here, you just had this check and it wasn't super clear what is going to do, right? It just says choose transaction, there's a check. Maybe users are going to understand it, but then having this at the bottom of the screen is very clear, super straight up front, and it's a very scalable pattern as well. So if I were to recap everything, so we start on the transactions tab where we have all the transactions. You have the button, which is basically the groups. This may not be the best icon, to be very honest, but I just use some icon over here, which look like a folder and shows, there are multiple things inside. We could probably choose a different icon, but that's not really the purpose of this. And then when you tap on that, you get to the group section, which is a linear navigation, right? We could make this a modal as well, but I decided to make this a linear navigation. All right. And then when you tap on Europe trip, we land over here. This also opens up in a linear navigation. All right. And over here on this screen, when I tap on add, I come over here to this screen, which is basically you can select transaction. This is the list of all your transactions. You can filter by date, time, whatever you need, category, subcategory, merchant, whatever you need, you can do all of that. Very similar to how a basic, filters pattern should work. This is basically the list of all transactions over here, right? So if you can filter whatever you can filter over here, you should be able to do the same thing over here because it is pretty much the exact same screen. All right. And of course, this we bring up as a modal. All right. And over here, you can select the transactions you want and you can say add transactions, and then that gets added over here and this gets updated. Right. So from a UI that looks like this with so many colors, so many font sizes, so many patterns, so many, inconsistencies, all of these screens look completely different, too many colors and everything. This looks like a much simpler approach, and this looks like, very similar to any of the other screens that we have designed in the entire app. And, we're just having basic set of components, reusing the same thing. And, it looks really great according to me, right? Let me know what you guys think in the comment sections down below, right? So I hope this makes a lot of sense. So that's pretty much it for this video, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys really enjoyed it. If you did, let me know in the comment sections down below. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more amazing, awesome content. And I'll see you guys in my next video. So till then, take care and bye-bye.